So welcome everybody to yet another webinar presented to you by IndiaBiostreams. This webinar is part 2 of the Science Policy 101 series that's presented by the Science Policy Forum. If you guys do not know about the Science Policy Forum, it is a collaborative initiative between India Bioscience, Sustainable Water Future Program, and the DST Center for Policy Research in Bangalore. So I would like to introduce today's speakers. Aditya Kaushik will be presenting today. He's the Deputy Director of Sustainable Water Future Program. Chagun Basha is also going to be one of the speakers this webinar. He is a policy science and technology innovation policy fellow at the DST Center for Policy Research in the Indian Institute of Science. And my name is Lakshmi. I'll be your host this afternoon. I'm the Program Manager, Digital Initiatives with India Bioscience. And just a quick look at the Science Policy Forum. It's a web page on the India Bioscience website, www.indiabioscience.org/Science Policy Forum. It's a collaborative page where we would put out a lot of different opinion pieces, articles, essays, as well as opportunities in the space of science policy. So if you're interested and if you're a science policy enthusiast, you must check out that page. Okay, so before we get started, let's get to know a little bit about some of you that have joined us using an audience poll. I'll be launching this poll any moment. For those of us who are watching us from YouTube, you'll not be able to see this poll. So we'll be able to share a Google form through the chat window on YouTube. Please use that to let us know a little bit about yourselves. So let's give about 30 seconds for responses to come in. So let me share the results of the poll. So all of you are from India, and we have a 36% from life science research in academia, and some of you are from the industry. We have 7% of educators. We have 7% who are master's students, different wide category of students, PhD students, postdoctoral fellows, and a few others. Welcome everybody, and we hope you will enjoy the webinar. So over to you, Aditya, to talk about the science and technology policies in India. So far, a flashback.
Thanks, Lakshmi, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today. Our previous webinar dwelled into the processes and institutions that go into creating policy for science. And this webinar, the part 2 of the STI series, will attempt to give you a retrospective on how science, technology, and innovation ecosystem that we see today came into being. So since our independence, India has been very successful in building a massive ecosystem of science, technology, and innovation. We call this STI ecosystem. This STI ecosystem includes universities, public-private enterprises, and human resources. We have over 40,000 plus colleges, 650 universities, over 600 research and development institutes, and over 200,000 science professionals. Some of the top scientists, technologists, and CEOs of the world have been beneficiaries of our science and policy ecosystem. This has been possible largely through 4 major policies implemented since independence, namely the Science Policy Resolution of 1958, Technology Policy Statement of 1983, Science and Technology Policy of 2003, and Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy of 2013. And this webinar, just a point of note, is that this webinar will be a very simple introduction of these STI policies. As a disclaimer, please note that this is not an in-depth evaluation of any policies that we discuss in today's webinar. And this is also one of the major points that we want to highlight, because an in-depth evaluation of any of these policies haven't been done in a comprehensive manner. So let's start with Science Policy Resolution of 1958. This was our first major science policy can be traced back to the year 1958. This policy document called as SPR 1958 was drafted by the government of then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. SPR 1958 laid the foundation of scientific enterprise and scientific temper in India. Nehru had imagined India to be a welfare state, and this resolution was born out of the realization that creation of a welfare state is only possible through investments in science and technology, and thus it can act. It was thought to act as an instrument of socioeconomic transformation. Investments in science and technology was critical to provide reasonable amount of economic, social, cultural amenities and services to every citizen, as it would reduce burden on the use of raw material and capital. So this policy document recognized that science and technology was crucial for nation building and prosperity. The purpose of this policy document was to cultivate scientific enterprise in pure science research, applied science research, and capacity building at a large scale. In order to achieve this goal, this policy document recognized that it was essential to develop educational programs to ensure adequate supply of scientists. As development of high quality scientists at a large scale was necessary to fulfill countries' needs, especially in the area of agriculture and defense. One of the other main features that this resolution highlighted was a need to create a culture and mechanism where creative talents of citizens are recognized. And there is a capacity or opportunity created within the scientific activity for these citizens. And also acquisition, dissemination, and discovery of new knowledge is encouraged. So this policy document of 1958 was largely or primarily a science policy document. If you go through the document, you'll see that technology development was given secondary importance, as it was assumed at the time that technology development could only stem through the study of science and its applications. Post SPR 1958, there was a large-scale investment in science, which resulted in emergence of several scientific organizations and national laboratories that do exist up to today. Thus, this policy document was able to lay a strong foundation in research and development and in higher education. In the aftermath of adopting the 1958 policy document, the next 3 decades was spent on building the science and technology ecosystem. By early 1980s, India had developed a strong industrial and an agricultural base, and also had a pool of large number of trained human resources. As technology was increasingly seen to influence lives and bolster societal expectations, the next major policy document focused on meeting people's aspiration through technology development, called as the Technology Policy Statement of 1983. The primary features of this policy statement was technological self-reliance and competence. This was to be achieved through promotion of indigenous technologies, promotion and development of indigenous technologies, as adoption of these indigenous technologies would reduce vulnerabilities in critical areas and would also help maximize the utilization of local human and material resources. It, however, recognized the importance of adoption of imported technologies in areas that India were not experts in at that time, but not at the cost of national interest. Finally, the technology policy document of 1983 stressed on strengthening the technological base, especially in sectors that were fairly new at the time in the area of information, electronics, and biotech. This was done through increase in R&D investments and collaboration amongst government organizations, educational institutions, and industries. So in order to achieve technological self-reliance, there was a committee that was set up. So post adoption of these policy documents, there were committees, apex bodies set up to chart out the implementation agenda of how you can realize the vision mandated by these policy documents. So there was a committee that was set up post 1983, which called for development of a technology development fund, which was to this was to provide financial assistance to Indian industries and to bolster indigenous technology development. It also highlighted the need for continuous systematic technology forecasting and assessment studies, especially in ministries with large investments and with high production value. So with this in mind, Technology Information Forecasting and Assessment Council, TIFAC, was established. And point to note is that both TDB and TIFAC are both in existence as of today. However, post 1991, as we all know, there was economic liberalization, which paved way for large foreign investments in several sectors. Thus, the concept of technological self-reliance and adoption of indigenous technologies were at odds with the economic policies in several socio-economic sectors. Now we move to Science Tech Policy of 2003. So by the turn of the millennium, India had established a sound infrastructure base in science and technology in terms of the multiple institutions that we had, or the number of scientists and technologists, engineers that we were churning out. And it was globally recognized. However, there was an acknowledgement that there were dramatic changes occurring in the area of science, in how science was practiced, in how technology was developed, in how science and technology interacted, and how they reinforced each other, and finally how they affected society. Science was getting more multidisciplinary. It was spanning different sectors and different countries. So thus it required development of cluster of interdisciplinary institutions and inter-country collaboration. So as we saw earlier on, the Science Policy Resolution of 1958 and Technology Policy Statement of 1983 focused on, as the name suggested, science and technology respectively and separately. However, science and technology enterprise was so intertwined that there was a need to think about them together rather than as separate elements. So with rapid advancement in information and communication technologies and democratization of the internet, exchange of knowledge and information was occurring at an unseen rate. Science and technology started having an unprecedented impact on economic growth and development. New issues related to cybersecurity, ethics such as privacy considerations, questions related to inequity came to the fore. In order to keep pace with the accelerating pace of science and technology, to stay competitive in an increasingly globalized world and meet our primary goal of being a welfare state, of providing equitable and sustainable development to all citizens, Science Technology Policy of the year 2003 was adopted. A significant feature of this policy document was to develop mechanisms within ministries and agencies to gather inputs from scientists and technologists with respect to policy planning. So scientists and engineers started playing a larger role in the policy space in various sectors. There was an explicit call. This is a very important point. There was an explicit call to invest heavily in the R&D sector, aim to increase our investment to 2% of GDP. STP 2003 recognized the need to modernize existing infrastructure for science and engineering in academic institutions, set up new funding mechanisms for basic research. There was a realization that even in the area of basic research, high-level investments were required. It was, it also called for development of incentive mechanisms to attract scientists and engineers, especially of Indian origin, from abroad, to contribute to the Indian ecosystem of R&D and encourage research and development and innovation in the area that impacts economy and society. So STP 2003 called for a cross-pollination of industry and scientific research, establishment of intellectual property rights regimes, and incentivize to protect and incentivize inventors. There was also, finally, it laid special emphasis on science diplomacy, especially on South-South international science and technological cooperation. Even though the term science diplomacy was not used in the year 2003, it was used much later on. But it's an interesting point to note that this was a policy document that actually explicitly called for international scientific collaboration. So post 2003, there was a significant rise in R&D investments. Even though typically the evaluation takes place after 10 years, and at the end of the 10-year period, the mandate of STI and period at the end of a 10-year period since STP 2003 was adopted, even though R&D investments did not reach 2% of GDP, it was at a respectable rate of 0.7%. There was also a rise in India's publication ranking. There was a steady increase in institutional and human capacity. We had more number of, we started churning out more number of PhD students. There were more patents filed and more startups incubated. As we saw that our first policy was on science, second was on technology, and third was on science and technology. The fourth and the final one that was implemented in the year 2013 was on science, technology, and innovation. The decade of 2010 to 2020 was declared as a decade of innovation by the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. It acknowledged that in order to stay globally competitive, it was necessary to make a transition to a knowledge-based economy. Thus, there was a need to synergize science, technology, and innovation, and position India amongst top 5 global scientific powers. So a critical new element in this, as the name suggests, the critical new element in this policy document was the term innovation. Promoting science and technology-led innovation ecosystem in the country and broadly linking science and technology and innovation to socio-economic priorities were some of the key aspects of STIP 2013. This policy document was a step in the right direction towards building a robust national innovation ecosystem, and had laid a way for India to participate and play a leadership role in global megascience initiatives. We still need to wait for an in-depth evaluation of this policy because we are still within that 10-year evaluation period. So a robust qualitative and quantitative evaluation needs to be conducted in order to understand the impacts of this particular policy. So to summarize, SPR 1958 was to develop scientific temper and facilitate capacity building. 1983, a technology policy statement of 1983 was to ensure technological competence and self-reliance. 2003 was called for increased investments in research and development, and called for international scientific collaboration, and to look at science and technology as one entity. And the Science Tech Innovation Policy of 2013 laid the path for science tech-led innovation for socioeconomic development. As you can see that, when you go through all these policies and the points that, some of the points that I highlighted from these policies, that all 4 policies stand relevant even today. These policies, unlike policies from other countries that have a time stamp on it, there are some policy documents that say, okay, it's valid between this year and this year. These policies are not time stamped. All the 4 policies are developing, evolving, and these being applied in current context. Sorry about that. So by all means, these are not the only 4 policies that were implemented or that had a big impact on the science policy ecosystem. In addition to these policies, to this primary set of STI policies, there are various relevant policy instruments which have strong interlinkages and overlapping mandate with the national STI policy. Time to time, these policy instruments are developed, deployed by several agencies, ministries at different levels, both at the central level and at the state level. So like the policies on innovation and industrial development, technology vision, ethics and responsibility, policy on resource sharing and accessibility, And there are several other regional STI policies. So combination of the four major policies that I spoke about, along with the other related STI policies, have shaped our national science and technology innovation ecosystem that we see today. So this is all from me. I'll hand over the discussion section to Lakshmi and Shagun.
Well, thanks a lot, Aditya. And we'll have an sort of a discussion session following which we'll open the floor for questions. I would like to invite Chagun. He's already here with us. So that was really nice, Aditya. Thanks for walking us through how our policies have evolved from being about science, then technology, then science and technology, and then STI. So one alphabet at a time we've been evolving. It's pretty nice. So I'll begin because I'm really curious to know from this 1958 policy, which talks about setting up all of these institutions. I'm curious to know which are these R&D institutions and national laboratories that were born as a direct or an indirect consequence of this, our first policy.
Right. I think first point to note is that, by all means, these policies don't stand on its own. They are affected or they impact and are impacted by other policies, like economic policies at that time, financial policies, political will. There are so many other variables at play. Having said that, the Science Policy Resolution of 1958 resulted in creation of governing structure of science and technology in India. Through apex committees and commissions. And these apex bodies eventually were instrumental in creating science and technological institutions of importance and repute. Some of the CSIR research institutes, even though CSIR was established in pre-independence in 42, but some of the CSIR research institutes, such as Indian Institute of Petroleum in Dehradun, established in 1960, National Aerospace Laboratories, again established in 1960, can take or did take inspiration or were a result of the SPR 1958. There were also increase in number of IITs post 58, and creation of large number of regional engineering colleges, what we call as NITs, that also came into being. So these are some of the, and there are many more. So these are some of the few that I can think of at the top of my head.
Yeah, so thanks, Aditya. That was a good coverage of all the policies that we have. Also, the time is limited, so I think that is why we could not go in much detail to other related policy instruments. Lakshmi, am I audible? Yeah, okay. So I actually have a very general question. I think it's going to be a question for many people who are also listening to us. See, you presented the four major policies and then some policy instrument which cuts across the mandate through other ministries and agencies, right? So right now, like where do we stand as a STI ecosystem in the country? Like where do you think our space is?
Maybe I can take a first stab at that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So there are various ways of evaluating these policies, right? And as you know very well, that an in-depth evaluation of these policies haven't been conducted. If you just look at the qualitative metrics, like for example, if you say, okay, X number of universities, IITs, PhD students, patent filed, these are some of the indicators that we can use to evaluate how well we have done, right? Like number of publications and so on and so forth. And looking at those numbers, you can actually say we've done a pretty good job in the last 70 odd years. But on the flip side, the reason science tech policy or science tech innovation policies over the years was adopted was to make sure that the concept of a welfare state could be realized. If you go through the policy documents, you'll see there's always a talk of or there, there is a talk of equitable and sustainable development. There's a talk of ending poverty using science and tech. And over these years, um, we have been successful in addressing socioeconomic problems using science and technology, but we still have some way to go. So there are various ways in which you can evaluate how we have done through these policies. And so this is what I think about. What about you, Shagun? What do you think about?
Yeah, just like when you're saying, something crossed my mind is
Yeah.
I always think in these two sides. One is quantitative and qualitative.
Right.
So I think in terms of numbers, quantitative, yeah, pretty impressive. Just you said in the presentation, also in the explanation. In the qualitative evaluation, also I think personally we have reached certain heights in
Mm-hmm.
some sectors, but I would still maybe add a pinch of salt there, because qualitatively, when we say, I mean, science is borderless, but when we say Indian science, we mean the science which is done by Indians in India and of that sort. I personally feel our evaluation, if we had to do today, would look very impressive, but qualitatively, we still have a lot of room to improve.
Mm-hmm. No, I concur.
Do you have something to say, Lakshmi?
Yeah, so I have another question for you, Chagun.
Yeah.
Related to the 2003 policy, maybe is um, so. Can you talk a little bit about some of those in schemes to incentivize return of foreign graduates and schemes to incentivize innovation?
Oh yes, yeah. Oh, that's a very useful question actually. One is from 2003 policy, that is science and technology policy. But the policy actually lists out the wish, but that has to translate into some program so that to bring people. But to now we can say we have few very good programs which incentivize people to return. People from India who went outside, study, do research, and to return to India and do maybe short term or longer term, but to contribute to our STA ecosystem. So some programs I can maybe mention. MHRD has a couple of them. Uh, DST and SCRB, Ministry of Science and Technology, has one or two more programs. Inspire is a very famous one. People use it, which is at different levels now. Inspire program, and we have short-term programs like GYAN, that's for Global Innovation and Academic Network. And we have Vajra, another program for academic and research collaboration. And recently announced program by MHRD, I think it's Spark. It's again scheme for promotion of academic and research collaboration. So these are larger programs, but there are also some instruments of programs in various agencies and ministries. Also at academic level, there are multilateral consortiums which give such programs also. Um, these are the few, I would say.
And just to come in, I believe every university, industry research areas also kind of facilitate inter-country collaboration, right? You have a lot of graduates of other, people studying in other universities or teaching in other universities of Indian origin, spending some time in Indian universities through these exchange programs. So this is another sort of development, and this is not just science per se, but it is also related to different sectors in the area of water or the area of monsoon. So something on.
I think on those lines, the Vajra program that mentioned about, exactly on those lines. Even the motivation for that program is that the non-residential Indians, the Indians who have become chair professors or researchers in industries elsewhere, are target audience for that program, let's say. So they do come in. We see in IISc there are a lot of users for that program.
Right.
Again, there are a lot of bottlenecks again there, because short-term programs you can't extend it for larger research agenda. So there are minor things, but somewhere we can start this, that creates. One more point I just want to highlight connected to that question is, you mentioned about international collaboration of our technical higher education institutions. now that we see a matured level of technical higher education in terms of institutions capacity and people, human capacity, I personally feel something that we have to look very carefully and also actively is internationalization strategy of Indian higher education institutions in general. Every institution has its mandate. Primarily, our IITs, ICERs, IISc, and NITs, they get some block grant to internationalize themselves. How do we actually use those grants strategically and optimally? All those things, it requires some thought process.
Can you elaborate a little bit about what you mean by internationalize the?
Internationalization is nothing but whatever science, tech, or engineering that happens in any academic institution or research institution, there is a motivation to do the collaborative research, collaborative academic programs or mobility programs. So that could be at various levels: short-term mobility, internship program, longer-term mobility, joint PhDs, joint masters. It varies at large level. But when I say internationalization strategies, it is not only about these programs. The internationalization strategy includes how a campus, like let's say ISC or IIT, actually becomes international in terms of taking all the international measures. For example, if international students coming here or like mid-career professionals coming to Indian campuses, how are we welcoming them? How good is their campus life? And how, because they are going to be the brand ambassadors of these institutions when they go back. And that is how a reputation of an institution grows. And not to mention the ranking system takes these perceptions into their calculations, right? To rank any institution. So I think we could have a detailed discussion on internationalization strategies itself, because there is a framework that we presented last year to IISc, which involves like 12 different blocks, how one institution could internationalize itself.
Mhm.
We could not hear you, Lakshmi.
Can you both talk about some of those mega science initiatives that India is a part of?
May I take a stab? Okay, that's easy because whatever is left can handle. So yeah, but first of all, we have to say what we mean by mega science. It's not some like physically also mega, but it doesn't only cover physically mega structures or mega experimental setups, right? Um, See, science is an endeavor, and I'm going into a philosophy mode now. So bring me back if I'm not returning. Okay. People actually invest a lot of time and try to solve some questions which are about life and the universe and everything. And some of these questions may not even have direct social implications. And many of the societal challenges nowadays doesn't limit itself to a geographical boundary. So this is just a philosophical background. Let's say I'm building a ground for my statement. Keeping that in mind, everybody looks for resource sharing, at the same time resource pooling. So experiments like CERN or LHC or a large array telescope or some larger biological or life sciences experiment, because I don't know the exact example, so I'm just using the term biological or cost if how do you say it, like too expensive experiments where countries come together and collaborate, and also experiments or let's say initiatives of developmental sort. For example, International Solar Alliance and the wind energy projects or coastal collaboration projects for weather predictions and disaster management. So all those are mega science projects. And India actually, after 2003, I think, started opening it up for more collaboration, more participation, and even taking leadership roles. International Solar Alliance is a classic example where India has taken a leadership role along with France. And in CERN and other areas, and other experiments and other mega science projects, India is an active member now.
I think you covered the whole gamut of the mega science project, right from pure science research to even related to climate change and its impact. So India has been
Yeah, that is another classic example. Yeah.
and India has been pretty active, vocal, and an eager participant in these sort of initiatives. Okay, so I have a question for you, Shagun, or to Lakshmi, whoever wants to take a chance. What is the role of um, data and evidence in informing and implementing these policies? I think we spoke about it a little bit last time around, but now that we've gone through the actual policy document, um, so yeah, what is the role of data and evidence that informs um, these policies? Because these policy documents stand separate, and then you have implementation documents. I mean, I know that in post 83 or 2003, you have a policy document with like a first level implementation strategy. But in order to implement something this big, you need to have a detailed or you need to design a detailed implementation strategy. So um, can you talk about role of data and evidence, and also talk about implementation strategies, or how implementation strategies are designed in order to realize these or the vision stated by the policy document?
Yeah, I mean that's a controversial territory for me to enter, but I'm going to enter and say something bluntly as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah, possibly you should edit it Lakshmi later so that I'm not in a troubled situation. But on a serious note, everybody talks about evidence-based policy making, policy implementation, or in general evidence-based policy process. And it's not just a catchy phrase, right? When we say evidence and data is part of the evidence, but data informs more
right.
facts than opinions and expert opinions. Or
People think when you say evidence based or something, it's like it's an obvious concept, right? And
exactly.
oh, why would you even want to say that? But yes, sorry, go on.
No, but that's a good catch. People just think that okay, evidence based means everything is based on evidence. Otherwise, nobody is just sitting around to write some storybook there. Yeah, so that's a
Especially
fact.
especially in science and tech.
Exactly. And but the reality is not the same. In reality, I mean, in my limited time as a policy fellow, I've at least observed and participated in some of the policy discussions in India. Um, Very lately, they started realizing the importance of evidence, I would say, at least post 2013 policy. That's when the centers that I'm part of came into existence, so that evidence gathering itself has become an exercise, and there are professionals involved in it, call ourselves science policy scholars, and we do research and bring out the policies so far that we had. Like you have read through, I have read through all the four policies, and Lakshmi has gone through and all of it. And I'm sure many of us, even in the participants, have read through all the policies at least once. We don't really see why one statement, a statement is made, or what is the rationality behind it. Some of the statements are ambitions, wish list. We understand there are good ambitions, and we need to do this. And but some other things are like we need to create n number of so and so offices, technology transfer offices, for example. Like where do you come up with this number? Like let's say if you say 50 technology transfer offices for a country like India, like how do you even come up with that number, exact precise number 50, right? So that is where data evidence plays a crucial role. And in Indian context, I wouldn't say that data and evidence is not completely taken into consideration so far. It has been part of policy discussions, inputs are used, but not in a way that it informs it sufficiently. To say, okay, making policy is one activity of the policy process. You also talked about policy implementation. So policy making process should keep that in mind. Like implementation is a process. Otherwise, you are just cooking a meal without even knowing how many people you are cooking for.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. I mean, I'm just giving a blunt example. I mean, maybe that is not so appropriate, but implementation strategies also need to take evidence into consideration, in my opinion. But the current policies to some extent have taken that into consideration, at least post 1983. But overall, if somebody wants to assess, data played a very little role in informing our STI policies. And that is something both government recognizes, academic personalities now recognizes, because mostly academic personalities are the ones who chair these policy committees. It's changing now. It's a very positive sign. But so far, I wouldn't say that all of our policies are completely evidence driven or data driven.
Okay.
And
So
yeah, I had one more question.
Yes.
Okay, this is again a general question, but even Lakshmi, if you want to add a few points here, please feel free to. Because you are also part of this system at some level. You attended some of our programs and the policy school and everything. How do you even like come to a, let's say, hypothesis, or conclusion is a bigger word to say, a policy is successful or a failure? Maybe we can just share our opinions, because without evaluation we cannot really say. But when we say a policy has become a successful policy or this is a failed policy, how do we say that?
So I think I alluded to it earlier when I said that you can when we were talking about where are we right now, whether it is whether has the STI policies over 70 years, how do you see them at the moment, right? And you spoke about quantitative assessment and qualitative assessment, and we spoke about number of universities. If that is our target metric, then we are successful, right? Like if we say, even though we did not list out and say, okay, we need to have 50,000 universities at the end of, or 50,000 colleges at the end of 2020, and if that was a requirement, and if we met that, then you would say, okay, we are successful. But I mean, it's a very complicated question to answer. So that is the reason why I asked you about the implementation question, because when you design any project or a large scale initiative, you do have a sort of a vision document, and most of these policy resolution documents come across as vision documents, saying that increase R&D spending, increase.
Enable more collaboration between
Right.
industry and academia.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Now, when you in real world, that can mean nothing and that can mean everything, right? So so I'm sure that after these policy documents were adopted, there were we've read that there were several committees set up to implement these policies, and it took, especially after between the first one and the second one, there were multiple committees that were, I mean, between 58 and 83, multiple committees that were set up to kind of really understand how do you go about implementing these policies. And when you talk about implementation and you talk about ground realities, that's where you try and identify what your goals are. Now, your goals have to be a bit more specific than your vision statements or your wish list, right? Then you'll find out what your objectives are. That has to be even more specific. Then you'll talk about activities that need to be undertaken in order to meet these objectives, eventually the goals. Then you need to have indicators in order to see if you're on track. Then you need to have a comprehensive monitoring, evaluation strategy in order to see if you are meeting, because the entire implementation space takes decades together. So you need to know if you're on track or not. And the entire science technology, even when you do all of these things, it doesn't exist in silos, right? It, as I said earlier on to Lakshmi's question, it is impacted and it impacts other policies. Impacted by other policy, impacts other policies. One clear example is the economic liberalization since 1991, right? And you spoke about indigenous, 83 spoke about indigenous utilization of technology, technological self-reliance and all of that. But then 1991, you had an economic policy that spoke about opening up the markets, spoke about foreign investment in different sectors. So that kind of is contradictory to what what the policy document actually, or the policy actually, had a vision on. So I think it's a very difficult evaluation process that needs to be undertaken, because it is, these policies, even within silos, if you want to analyze it, it is difficult to do. But in the larger context of economics, social science, political science, international affairs, geostrategy, all of that, in the larger climate change now, in the larger context, it is even more difficult to sort of really pinpoint and say, okay, whether this was a success, whether this was not. So that's my 2 cents on
Yeah, you are a true diplomat. You just navigated this space as if you can go this way also, but in middle way we will stand. But I think I knew this kind of because there is no binary answer to it.
right.
And there you cannot make yes or no here, successful or failure. It's
Yes.
always going to be mixed bags because wish list is always about mixed bag. Like sometimes you aim high so that at least you can reach some heights. So,
Right. I mean, the fact that all policy documents are relevant even today, right?
yeah,
When,
yeah, and maybe this is a key takeaway here, which
yeah.
is evaluation is a key to
Hmm.
see where we stand and where we want to take it further, and we should be able to kind of come up with a simpler evaluation mechanism, not so to
Yeah.
go to complex modes of indicators, numbers, and everything.
Right.
I think we'll be running out of time if we just continue this
Yeah.
conversation.
Maybe I can just ask one more question before we open the floor for question and answers. Lakshmi, is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room here, Shagun. We spoke about, now let's talk about money, right? And
Uh-huh.
always been, called to invest more in R&D. And till 2003, there wasn't a figure that was quoted. And in 2003, they said, okay, increase R&D expenditure to 2% of GDP. And we are at 0.7. I don't know what position we are at right now. So what is the story about this magic number of 2% of gross expenditure on research and development?
Yeah, I mean, I know this is something I really wanted to discuss, but again, this is a very sensitive topic because mostly the number becomes not just a bureaucratic issue, but a political issue. When India dropped several ranks in GII, Global Innovation Index, that becomes a headline for us. And until recently, it wasn't, but very recently, it became a matter of political campaign and everything. But this particular number, as far as STI, Science, Technology, Innovation Policy ecosystem is concerned, that is the percentage share of national GDP, how much we invest of that share into research and development activity has been a very, very crucial indicator to say where does a country stand in terms of its innovation capabilities. I know it is not a direct measure, but it's an input measure of overall research and development or a knowledge creation activity to measure, right? 2%, like you said, 2003 document asked for and expected that we would achieve it in next 5 years. 2013 document said that before 2017 we would achieve 2% of GDP, and be surprised if we recently had another report. I don't know whether I can show this live like here.
Yeah.
So R&D expenditure ecosystem report released by Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, which is just July 2009, the most recent one. I would recommend anybody who is looking for most recent numbers, a wealth of data is presented in that. This also again talks about increasing the R&D budget to 2% of our national GDP before 2022, which is quite soon. So this is, of course, a magic number because this is debated, talked about. So many official policy documents has this 2%. Currently, like I said, we stand at 0.69. When 2013 policy came out, we were at 0.89. So instead of going from 0.89, even a bit higher, which is moving towards the 2%, they've come down now to 0.69. which is something like an elephant in room, like you said. This answers most of the questions that we talked about: why evidence is important, why data is important, why proper implementation strategies to be taken care when we even draft the policy. Because you can't just mention a number like a benchmark for last 2 decades and
Right.
still not able to achieve it, which means either our calculations are basically not right, or we are just aiming too high without even knowing that we are never going to achieve it, at least in the next frame of 5 to 10 years. I think we should discuss that in detail also in R&D expenditure webinar that we will be launching soon. I'll leave it to Lakshmi now to open it up.
Yeah, so we'll open the floor for questions. I see Vijayashree has raised your hand, so I'm just going to. So Vijayashree, you can ask your questions. Else, Shreya, can you take us through some questions in the Q&A box?
Sure. So we will take a few questions from the Q&A box now. Okay, so Kuldeep wants to know, does any of the 4 policies talk about development of scientific temper or attitude among the citizens of India?
Oh, yes. The 1958 document is all about that, all about creating mechanisms to incentivize people to enter into science and technology. How do you get people interested in this space, and also not just interested but also create opportunities? And I think the ethos of this scientific temper is carried right through all the 4 policies. And the fact that we've created, the implementation strategy as well, created so many when there is increase in investments in R&D, when there is opportunities created for students for higher education in our country, all of that leads to creating opportunities for people to take up science and tech.
Yes, true, very true. We have a question about what are the markers to assess implementation of these policies? For example, the 2003 policy, how has it been assessed today?
Want me to take it up?
Yeah, if you can.
Oh, okay. I'll just add, maybe if I'm not complete, you can just add more. It's an easy answer for me to say there are no markers. But people like scholars who study science policies, who review science policies, those are the ones, who actually wrote about how this policy is drafted, implemented, and what are the outcomes. But again, it all comes from one or two authors' perspective through a proper research methodology that they follow, like science policy scholars. 2003 science technology policy is assessed by few people. Few names that I could think of is Dr. Tabassum Jamal from NISTATS. She has published few papers on evaluating the outcomes of this policy.
Okay. And Aditya, is there anything you want to add to that?
Again, as we said earlier, that there isn't a evaluation done, and we need to really look at what the implementation agenda of every policy has been. And I'm pretty sure in the implementation agenda, people would have identified certain things that need to be achieved within certain number of years. And if you call those as markers, then sure. But for that we haven't really had an opportunity to look at the implementation agenda of these policy documents. But once this 2013 policy document, that's within a 10-year period, once that gets evaluated, I'm sure
Okay.
Shagun and his group work towards conducting a robust evaluation document. I'm pretty sure we will answer this question.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have another question that answer might tie into, and that's, are there any organizations in India which undertake systematic evidence-based analysis and review the existing policies? This is a question from Mohua, one of our participants.
Yes, yes, yes. That is where I come from. So 2013 policy document, when it got released, at that time the DST Secretary, Professor T. Ramaswamy, came up with a plan that this policy is excellent, it's all fine, but we need a solid research backup for policy, making policy, evaluating policy, studying policy and everything. And that's when they launched these centers for policy research across the country. There are 5 of them now. And one is in Bangalore in IISc campus. It's called DST Center for Policy Research. And these are DST run centers, but these are not the only centers, because if you say these are the 5 centers, then you might ask, then there was an absolute gap before or void before. It's not the case. JNU has a center called Center for Science Policy Studies. Gujarat Central University has one, and some of the IITs, the ones I can remember of, IIT Indore and IIT Delhi and IIT Madras has policy groups, science and technology policy group who do this work.
Okay. There is a question about recruitment systems in universities, whether that comes under the purview of policies, and whether, since that ensuring transparent recruitment is a priority today, is that something the science and technology policies cover?
Aditya, I'll just answer and you can add it maybe. I'm just tempted to answer this. Okay, this is not directly science and technology policy. Being said that, this again, like how Aditya was presenting, it has an overlapping mandate. MHRD is the one mandated agency to take care of all the recruitment process in Indian higher education institutions, and its transparency, ethics, and everything about openness followed there. I agree that it is not a transparent process in India in most of the elite and premier institutions. Research evaluation, when I say research evaluation, that itself is one of our topic that we're planning to do as part of our seminar series in a Science Policy Forum. It's a very gray area in India, I would say, because individual research evaluation depends on group of people. Like PhD student is evaluated by a committee set by her or his own professor. Similarly, a faculty candidate's evaluation is done through various mechanisms, and none of those mechanisms are transparent, I would say. I mean, maybe this is a harsh thing to say about. Few activities are transparent, few are really not. For example, they call it something called peer evaluation, and they just get some letters from somebody in that field of science and saying that this person is good or bad. We don't know how that is taken into a neutral evaluation. So I'll leave it there, but there is a lot to discuss about this.
Okay. Okay, so we will move on to the next question. So Kuldeep has a couple of questions about publication, whether the policy documents say anything about where researchers should publish, what sort of journals they should publish in, and how their research should be evaluated.
Aditya, want to take?
Well, I guess, I mean, I haven't come across any specific topic on within the policy where these publications need to be submitted. I guess the entire enterprise of science has publication or publishing into journals as a critical element, right? So it is encompassed within what makes a successful scientist or a technologist or an engineer.
Yeah.
So that itself is is, you know, the policy documents talking about that. And I believe that when they say, okay, we want to produce X number of scientists or X number of engineers, publication plays a critical role in it. And we see that in our institutions, right? Like people who are PhD holders, scientists, and even engineers, they are encouraged to publish quite a lot. So I guess it is part of these documents in that regard.
And the second part of his question also talks about the enemy is within. Does the policy document says anything about the importance of publishing paper in Indian scientific journals?
Yes.
That is how it is linked to why Indian journals are not making mark in the international science knowledge, right? As of what I know, maybe I'm wrong. there is no mandate which says that, or maybe there is no incentive which says that you publish in Indian journals and we give you credits or you will be given preferences. Rather, it is the other way around. You say you have a publication in Nature or Science of layers, and you would be taken like a piece of cake in evaluation.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the impact factor of these journals are not sort of mentioned in the policy documents at all. And this publication of perish notion that Kuldeep talks about is not just in Indian science, right? It's global. So I think that's the reality that we live in. But also, one of the hard things moving forward, we do see a lot of people who are actively participating in this ecosystem and doing really well without without this publication of perish sort of notion. And I think we can have a separate conversation.
I just have one small point to add here, Shreya, if I am able.
Yeah, yeah.
One is this has a avalanche loop effect. When I say that, what I mean is because Indian journals are currently, let's say, not so good, and we go to publish somewhere else, and then people who evaluate us in India, like governments who recruit or universities, also look for the reputed journals and they promote that, and it's a cycle. We have to somewhere break this cycle. For example, he has given an example of current science. And current science is a very good place, and why it is not equivalent to science of today is something we need to ask as researchers and publishers.
Okay. So I think we have time for one last question and then we will move on. So, okay. So Kalyan has asked about the areas of possible research in science policy in India, if there are some issues. And I think, Chagun, you would be best placed to answer this.
I don't know what is Kalyan's exact academic background or what he means by research in science policy. I'm assuming the areas within science policy as a research field.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to answer. So science policy, like I said, when we say science policy, it is not only science policy. It has expanded in scope, which is research policy, technology policy, science and tech together, or technology and science the other way around, innovation policy. All that comes under science policy. Even science diplomacy, technology transfer, everything. So these are all areas. Like even within that, you can do two types of research in science policy. One, methodology-based research. You could be a quantitative science policy research scholar where you can use psychometrics, bibliometric, econometrics, or innovation measurement as your methodology to look into various science policy questions. For example, one question could be why countries patent in a way that they patent, or why firms in a particular country like India patent in a way that they patent, and why that differs in other countries. This could be a very interesting policy question. And this question could be answered through quantitative methodology as well as qualitative methodologies. So that depends. Sectorally, there are people who are doing science policy studies and research like energy-based, biotech-based, life sciences-based. So it could be both ways. And I'd be even more interested to talk and list out all the possibilities.
Okay. So, yeah. So back to you, Lakshmi, now for wrapping this session up.
Okay, so thank you, Chagun and Aditya for joining, and thank you, Shreya, for helping out with the Q&A moderation. It was a very useful session, I hope, for everybody. And just FYI, all the 4 policy documents are compiled, and we've added that to the Science Policy Forum, and I'll share that link via the chat window right now. And do check out the Science Policy Forum for this resource, and also keep on the lookout for our next webinar. Which we hope to announce soon in this series, Science Policy 101. So thank you for joining, and goodbye from us at the Science Policy Forum and IndiaBiostreams webinars by India Bioscience. You can thank too.
Yeah, last time I missed thanking. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Shreya. Thanks, Lakshmi. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.